The first time I came across the story of Muharram was when I really started to research more into Islam. I'd already reverted by this time, but there was still a lot of confusion as to what my beliefs were, because obviously when you become a Muslim, first thing you learn about is Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the Quran and a few of the early stories about how Islam came to be. But when you pass that stage, you really start to wonder what path to go down. Obviously after the Prophet, peace be upon him, passed away, there was the kind of division between the Ummah as to who was the successor after him. And that's when I started to really sort of speak to friends, people from my local mosque, about what exactly their beliefs were, why they believed this, and so on. A few of my friends were Shiites, and they obviously had the stories regarding the Ahlul Bayt, Imam Ali, peace be upon him, and so on. But a lot of my friends were actually from the Sunni sect. And originally, there was a time where I was learning a lot more about the companions and so on, and potentially would have gone down the path of Ahlul Sunnah. But when I heard about the story of Muharram and how Imam Hussein ﷺ was put through this terrible test, and how he proved himself to be not only just a really, really great leader, but also to be so brave to stand up against such evil and to really, really stand up for a good cause. And when you hear about the story, there was only one answer I could give, hearing about how he stayed so loyal, how he was able to deal with all of the suffering and pain that he was put through, and not just him but his family as well. So clearly when you see the story of Muharram, how it all took place and what happened, and how Hussein and his family dealt with all of this terrible situation that they were put through, you can clearly see who the real Muslims are and who the people I want to be following are. Hearing the story obviously at first was really, really surprising for me, because, you know, being born outside of Islam, I really didn't know much about Islam, especially the Prophet's family. So Hussein and Muharram and all of these stories I had absolutely no knowledge of before becoming a Muslim. So now that I was hearing all of this information and how badly the Prophet's family had suffered, especially during Muharram, it really, really helped me to kind of understand a lot more about Islam, a lot more about Shia Muslims in particular. And even to this day, you know, I've learned so much from this one story, and obviously there's so many stories, not just from Hussein, but the whole of the Ahlul Bayt and the Prophet, peace be upon them all. But this one story in particular really hit home and really, really touched my heart because of how much suffering that they were put through, but still they stuck to Islam, they stuck to the messages and the principles of Islam. And truly, truly, you can really see that these are the true infallible family members of the Prophet that just stuck with Islam no matter what. And when you see how someone is really tested, so obviously you can get a lot of people talking about how they would react in certain situations and how they would stay by their principles and so on. But when you actually see Hussein and his family were actually in the situation where it was life or death, where they were being really, really brutally oppressed, and how he handled it and how he stuck to Islam so loyally, I really personally felt as if there was no one else but the Hussein and the Ahlul Bayt were just the ones for me. When I first came across the story, at first was really just confusion. Obviously I'd never heard the story before. It was surprisingly incredibly detailed. It was very graphic, and the amount of suffering that they were put through, not just on the final day of Ashura, but the 10 days leading up to Ashura as well, was quite unbelievable to read. Obviously because I knew that this was the Prophet's grandson as well. I was really, really shocked, and at the time I wasn't sure whether it was a little bit exaggerated, where maybe some of the stories were not necessarily how it actually went down. But the more and more research that I did, and just because originally I heard from the stories from brothers speaking to me, and it was kind of word of mouth where I first came across the story. And some of the stuff I wasn't sure if it was real or not, how much of it was true and misconceptions and so on. But when I actually came down to it and I was reading and I did some personal research and looking into it myself, and when you see how much of it's actually true, how they suffered and how brutally they were sort of picked on by these really oppressive rulers at the time, you know, it was really shocking, really, really shocking. Obviously I have a lot of love for the Prophet, peace be upon him, a lot of love for Islam, and naturally that love was really growing for his family as well. And even if it were to happen to a companion of the Prophet or a distant friend of the Prophet, I would be really upset. But for it to happen to his grandson in particular, it was just unbelievable to read. I really couldn't understand how anyone would have been able to do that to someone who was so close to the Prophet. You know, Hussein was around when the Prophet was alive. You know, the Prophet used to treat him like he was his own son. He was always with him. The number of hadiths and how many times the Prophet spoke highly of Hussein and Hassan, his whole family. He spoke of them so highly. So for anyone who, and a lot of the people who oppressed the Imam and his family was also around when the Prophet was around. So for these people to live with the Prophet and have so much knowledge of him and love for him, and then a few years down the line to oppress his family so badly was unbelievable. It's always been very emotional for me to talk about, and when I really started to understand the religion of Islam, obviously my love was growing and growing at that point, but then to reach this kind of, it was like hitting a wall, this story. Everything's good up to this point, everyone loves to talk about the Prophet, all the achievements he made, Islam was growing, but then all of a sudden you just hit this wall where, you know, Islam just kind of like stopped. You know, there was this kind of like deterioration of Islam almost, how there was these oppressors who were ruling different parts of the Middle East and the Ummah at that period, and how Hussein had to be put through such a test. And this is, again, the grandson of the Prophet we're talking about. It's not a friend or a politician. This is the grandson of the Prophet. This is his blood walking on earth at that time. When I first came to Islam, I had a lot of Sunni friends, and I had one or two Shiite friends as well. When I decided that I wanted to become a Muslim, they all kind of jumped on me. They wanted to teach me and bring me to their mosques and let me, they wanted to be like my teachers and stuff and tell me everything they wanted to know. And it was a really great time. I was learning a lot, and obviously, like I said, I was learning a lot about the early years of Islam, Prophet, the Quran, and a few teachings, how to pray, for example. But after a period of time, when I started to hear the kind of divisions in belief, so how to pray correctly and so on and so forth, and obviously after the Prophet passed away, I started to hear the kind of two sides. There was the stories of the Ahlul Bayt, Imam Ali and so on, and then there was the stories like from the companions and stuff. And when I was kind of really discovering myself as a Muslim, how I wanted to pray, how I wanted to, what teachings and beliefs I wanted to follow in particular, it was the stories of the Ahlul Bayt which were really, really shining to me. Imam Ali in particular was a very, very inspirational character to me, how close he was to the Prophet and so on, and all the things that he said and did in his life, not just when the Prophet was around, but also after the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, how Imam Ali was living, how he was acting, the decisions he was making, and his teachings were just really, really drawing me to him in particular. And obviously from there I wanted to learn more about after him and his children, Hassan and Hussein, Fatima as well, peace be upon them all. And obviously when you start speaking to Shia Muslims about the Ahlul